Harriman Institute. And I want to just introduce Gail, who is my former student. She took my class and wrote an excellent paper on Kazakh nationalism, which we were discussing, and her thesis from way back then still holds up.
Can we get a copy?
So Gail did her graduate work at Columbia, but she's still nowadays active at the Harriman Institute, where she's the chair of our National Advisory Council. She's also the chair of America for Bulgaria Foundation, which is directly relevant to the topic of our discussion today. She is the non-executive director of the Sialu Bank, which was something we were commiserating on. Since as acting director, I'm also non-executive and pass any real work under the staff of the Harriman Institute. Gail got her start in the Soviet studies business when she was a youngster living in the dorm across the street from the Hermitage. And despite the fact that this was, for some reason, a place where it was difficult to get food in 1975,
right.
She found this, the culture and everything about it compelling, and stayed in this business for her career. I was just recently reading John Hazard's memoir of what it was like to be a law student in Moscow during the Great Purges. And he also mostly complained about the difficulty of getting food, and how he got a big tub of peanut butter sent to him that he used to survive for the winter. I really don't understand why it was so hard to get good food in Leningrad in 1975. I was in MGU in the dorm in 1979, and we had great food. And then there was 35-cent cappuccino at the American embassy. So Gail did turned her dissertation into a book, Banking on Small Business, Cornell University Press, 2007, on microfinance. Through her career, she's been an advisor and consultant to banks, and she wrote fun blurb on herself.
I can't believe how much reading you.
Where she explained that the key to being a banking consultant is reading the room. And in fact, she kind of boldly claimed that she could go into any bank or any organization and quickly understand, like, what was working right and what was working wrong. And the hard part is convincing the people in the organization to actually do what she recommends them to do. So she's always been insightful and has had a very light touch with the Harriman as a consultant on the National Advisory
I'm just trying for you to convince you to do what I know you need to do. That's the problem.
That's exactly. We're working on it.
Okay.
So Gail.
Great. Okay. So my job
The floor is yours.
Is to introduce our speakers today. Thank you, Jack. Who are, just for context, leaders of two of the most prominent civil society organizations in Bulgaria. I'll start with Louisa Slavkova, who is the founder and the co-executive director of the Sofia platform, which is
I
an
couldn't
orga-
get rid of the executive.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. Executive as opposed to non-executive, which is a organization that focuses on using the Bulgaria's communist legacy as a foundation for helping people understand the importance of active participation in democracy. So, the story of this happened in our country, it's everybody's individual responsibility to prevent it from ever happening again. And then Nadia Shabani is the executive director and one of the founding members of the Bulgarian Center for Not-for-Profit Law, whose work is focused on creating the legal framework and the overall environment in which civil society organizations can operate in Bulgaria. And there's information in the bulletin about their various accomplishments, and I'm not going to go into those. Although it's not really fair because now you've heard about my accomplishments, but I'm gonna, you can do your own research. But the thing is, what I wanted to really stress is that, to me, one of the themes in their work, which I think will come out in the conversation today, is the adaptability and the creativity with which they respond to the, continuing challenges in Bulgarian civil society. And I think it's that approach and that willingness to constantly learn, question themselves, understand what's happening, and evolve that explains the success that they've had so far in being effective in their work. And that it's my not only my hope, but also really my belief that 30 years from now, future Harriman generations will be sitting around this table looking at, I don't want to jinx anything, but the success of Bulgarian civil society, and maybe even the lessons that can be shared with other countries. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'm passing everything over to Gail Archer, who is the co-director of the East Central European Center at Harriman.
Good morning, good afternoon, I guess by now. Yes, it is 10 minutes. I'm delighted that you are all here for this discussion. Bulgaria has played a role in my research and my creative work in this last year. I went to Dobrich, Bulgaria, to record the first CD of music that was newly released by the Union of Bulgarian Composers. 14 new volumes of choral and organ music coming out of Bulgaria. It's so beautiful. And the people at Varna and at Dobrich, the Bulgarians were so warm and welcoming and helping in every possible way. We had 2 days in the beautiful concert hall in Dobrich to record, and then I played the program live for a Bulgarian audience. During Polignali and Tudora, the whole audience was just, they all knew it. It was so inspiring. So it is my great joy and pleasure to have both of you here this morning to talk about the important political changes in Bulgaria. Please, welcome.
I am sorry that I'm going to disappoint you, but I think there's going to be very little content to clap on.
Oh dear.
At least in my
Anyway, we'll clap right now.
at least in my part. So the way, thank you very much, obviously, to the Harriman Institute. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Gail. I thank everyone for being interested. Thank you to all the friends and Bulgarians in the room for showing up for us today. The way Nadia and I imagined this conversation is by starting us off with a little bit of a context where the country is at right now. Not giving you too many details because we know you were a group of interested folks. There are also some experts in the room that know some of the things much better than us. And so then after that general context, I'm heading over to Nadia to speak about where civil society fits into that. And also, what are some of the strategies that civil society has been adopting to try to fight back. And she and I are sitting far apart because we've been traveling for 2 weeks now together. No, it's just for convenience to be able to see this live. So today is March 3rd. On March 3rd, Bulgaria is marking its national holiday. However, this date, just like pretty much everything right now in the country, is a reason for polarization and is contested. It's contested why? For a couple of reasons. Now, first of all, this is a date that marks a 1878 event when the Russo-Turkish War ended, and there was a treaty signed, and Bulgaria was not on the table when this treaty was signed. This granted liberty to to a part of what used to be medieval Bulgaria, because Bulgaria was part of the of the Ottoman Empire for 500 years, almost until then. And so the national holidays date was decided in the beginning of the 90s by the former communist, then already socialist party. And especially with the beginning of the war in Ukraine, that date's right to be Bulgaria's national holiday has been put in question. So I have put two pictures which are very, very different in their general tone. The one on the bottom is very heroic. You see the lion, you see a monument erected to mark that historical battle. You see on the left some Ottoman soldiers being fought back by, I would think, Russian soldiers. And at the top is a picture of another date that is being proposed as a potential new date for a Bulgarian national holiday. But what this discussion on March 3rd tells me about the context of Bulgarian society in the last 5 years is that it is, on the one hand, a realization, I would say, of society that there are parts of our history that are not either heroic or a part where we are clearly a victim, but it's something else. And it's also coming to terms with one's own role for one's own fate. So it's in a way an emancipation phenomenon, if you will, for me. Now, speaking of history and speaking of Russia's role brings me directly to the topic of transition from communism to democracy. Let's hope we never speak about transition from democracy to something else. Now, because of the fact that communist history is very tightly connected to Russia and to the Soviet Union, our transition to democracy was not a transition where we spent a lot of time dealing with the communist past, to a point where the research in the country and all the educational work is happening out of civil society's hand entirely without the state support. So there is no institutionalization of that whatsoever. Now, Bulgaria is part of both NATO and the European Union, and I just want to remind you that back in the days, these were considered to be the two sides of the same coin on the way to democratization. Some people tend to forget that about NATO, but this is the way NATO accession was perceived back in the days. Now, at this day and age where whatever we call it, a global world order crumbles. In a way, neither of these institutions provide a safeguard for democracy in the country. The European Union, I'm not sure how much you are interested in how it's developing, but it's an organization based mainly on consensus. Now, this is contested at this day and age because it's very difficult to take decisions and rally everyone's support of all 27 countries. So in a union that is being a very important safeguard of democracy for Bulgaria, where small groups are formed around interests, it's becoming increasingly difficult to expect and rely on the European Union to hold us accountable for democratic institutions. Now, we are headed to the polls in April for the 8th time in the last 5 years. And so this comes to tell us that we are basically in a constant election cycle. So imagine this country, and you're very familiar with polarization here. I don't need to tell you what that is. Imagine if you were in constant election campaign mode for five consecutive years. I've put a number of the turnout in 2024, the last elections. So it's roughly 34%, which means not many people are actually willing to go to the ballots at all. Now, why is Bulgaria going to the polls so often in these past 5 years? I have tried to do and please don't quote me on this one, it's a very rough and non-professional attempt to picture the impossibility to build a stable government, because these are self-hating parties in a way. So you have first of all, there is a broader trend in Europe to have a fragmentation in political life. So the times of the big, stable, centrist parties is over. You have more and more fragmented parliaments where many parties join, but then it becomes difficult to form a stable coalition government. So in most countries, these coalition governments, even though the parties hate each other in the coalitions, they are stable, they remain stable. But this has not been the case in our country, where they have been extremely short-lived. So you have the current mix based on polls from February. You have on the upper left, we call them status quo, or I would call them status quo just for the sake of simplicity today. Status quo in that case means specifically not wanting to change anything related to rule of law. Bulgaria has a big problem, like many post-communist and post-Soviet countries, with rule of law, especially with the office of the prosecutor general. So in our country, this is like a separate pillar of power that has been the main instrument to go after your enemies. And so these countries are opposed to rule of law reforms. I call them pragmatic pro-Westerners. That's why they're not entirely in the upper part of the quadrant. Opportunistic pro-Westerners means that in the absence of democratic accountability coming from abroad, coming from the global democracy police officer in the States, they start to be opportunistic when it comes to whether they're pro-Western or pro-Russian. Now, on the upper right side, you have a small coalition party that is anti-status quo, meaning they are pro-legal reform and they're pro-Western. You have a new kid on the block. This is the name of our now former president, Radev, who has just left the president's office and is going to run for parliament. And he is, I put on the left, he's seen as the savior on the white horse. And so immediately attracting support out of both the voters who have not been voting over the past years, but also obviously taking away votes from all the other parties. And then on the lower right side, you've got Bulgaria's, I would say, probably far-right party, who is too anti-status quo, but is very much pro-Russian. That would be one of the parties in Bulgaria that are considered to be a Russian proxy. So that shows, I think, pretty, in a very non-professional way, how difficult it becomes to build a majority that you could have govern in a stable way and actually pass through policies that make sense. In terms of the cleavages in the political system, I think one of the most important cleavage at this point is either Sofia and the rest of the country, or Sofia, big cities, and then towns and villages. I'm not sure if you have been looking at electoral maps. I'm pretty sure you know the American ones very well. But when you look at electoral maps in Central and Eastern Europe, there is always the capital is in one color and the rest of the countries is in a different color. So in the Bulgarian case, very often the capital votes, there is a concentration of liberal vote, and then comes the rest of the countries. In this case, the majority so population in the capital votes for the anti-status quo pro-Western. Cities is mainly GERB, so that's the large conservative party in the country. Radev, as I said, I think he's going to take vote from everywhere. And Возрождение is, I am thinking small portions also across the country, but mainly cities and towns. I put in brackets a term that we coined a couple of years ago, civic deserts, just to signal to the fact that there are big parts of our country. This is something Nadia is going to talk about, where there is basically no civic activity happening. There is no organized civil society. There is also no grassroots civil society, which has also a direct impact on how people vote and participate in general. And just to highlight again, political parties thrive on polarization. This is not news. This has been researched heavily over the years. The problem is when you enter that nonstop election cycle phase where you're basically in constant campaign mode for so many years. And so parties have zero incentive to depolarize society, because the lower polarization is, the lower the chances that they get their voters to turn out in large numbers. And when when people show up in smaller numbers to the polls, the incentives to keep polarizing are even higher for them. Now, this is the average Bulgarian. Who is the average Bulgarian today? Someone that doesn't vote in high numbers, apparently. 1/3 of the population lives in Sofia. This is important to keep in mind because this is a heavily centralized country. I am thinking one of the mistakes that we have all done in the 90s, in the first years of transition to democracy, is to allow for this, is to allow it to create the incentives for this to happen, because then you have a great concentration of people that are democratically minded in the capital, but not in the rest of the country. This is a society that is highly distrustful. People trust their immediate circle, their families, but the moment you start leaving that close-knit circle, trust is deteriorating, especially when it comes to institutions. Now, there is a really valid reason for that. They do not deliver, especially judiciary, as I talked about previously, but also healthcare and education. But trust vis-a-vis parliament was, I think the last time I looked at the data, at around 8%. And this is the body that's embodying representative democracy. Now, Bulgarians, I would say, protest when it's absolutely necessary. And there have been decisive moments in our history when we have taken to the streets in great numbers. And so to the right, there is a large protest in 1997, when I think we ended up changing political forces, but also decisively took on a path to a NATO and European accession. And to the left, these are, maybe some of you saw the headlines in the New York Times. These are protests that toppled the last government in December. And so on the left picture, you're going to see Nadia and I there at the back. There's me, our parents at the back. However, there is a, I'm cautious to call it a phenomenon, but we have observed the last protest wave last winter, or this winter, to be a moment of political socialization of the generations Z. So the assumption so far was that these are young people who are disinterested, that care only about, I don't know, social media influencers who share information about clothing and food. But this has been such a moment of them showing up for democracy, not just in the capital, but across the country, different cities. So we are closely observing them as a group, are really interested in the energy and, all the energy that they're bringing, just keeping in mind that they're a tiny little piece of Bulgaria's society. But as someone told me today, it's enough to have 2% of any group be convinced of something, and then change is going to come. And here I'm turning over to Nadia to tell us about how civil society is operating in this polarized environment.
Okay, thank you, Louisa. First of all, I also want to say that I feel honored that I'm part of this conversation, and I can bring to the table our dreams and thoughts about civic activism in Bulgaria.
Can we do a sound check?
So my voice is very low, so I'm worried that in the back, maybe you are not hearing me. So, no, hear it to be okay, but just raise your hand if you do not hear me. I can repeat it. I prefer to do this rather than not to hear me, but this is the maximum of my voice. So, can I have the? There you go. Thank you. So, I will zoom your attention now to the civil society organization and their role in the modernization of our society. So we have here two numbers. The civil society organizations are approximately 30,000 in Bulgaria with 6.5 million population. So we are not a big community. Half of them are active, including in this number, I put the number of sports clubs and community centers. 1 million are the number of the companies registered in Bulgaria. So see, comparing to the two actors in the private sector, we are a very small community of active citizens that are gathering together to bring some change. Something about our civil society. The modern civil society organization started to be created after 2001, already 25 years only, because in 2001 was adopted the new law that is allowing the people to establish an organization without the influence of the executive power and to get together to reach their common goals. So it's a young community, 25 years old, like something like a Gen Z generation of civil society organizations. We have a long list of problems in Bulgaria related to the civil society organization. I want just to highlight the chronic underfunding, because after 2007, when we entered the European Union, all the big donors left Bulgaria, including USA ID support. So this is why last year when we had the stop order, Trump administration decision, this didn't affect a lot the Bulgarian civil society organization regarding the funding. Also, as Louisa mentioned, there is no or very small amount of funding related to advocacy work or grassroots work. So this is why this program with the Civic deserts, it's really a huge problem, because in all these areas, people feel really abandoned. Just one relation to the Hungary history. In fact, Orban started to build his power after he lost election in 2000 for a mayor of Budapest, and he went to the similar Civic deserts when nobody is existing and started building the relationship there. So this is why our task is really to go there and destroy this landscape. So two questions I want to put in my presentation. I'm trying to open the conversation after that. We were thinking with Louisa how to introduce the momentum in Bulgaria that we have in the civil society sector. And we can see them as challenges, but also as an opportunities. So this is why I call them challenging opportunities. And I want to highlight three. The first one is that nevertheless that we are a small number of organizations, there is a huge expectation from the society that we should lead the modernization of the state. That the civil society organizations are the platforms where business, people from administration, different professional groups are meeting, reach an agreement and change the policies that we have in the place. And if you look to the history of the changes in the last 25 years, you'll see that the social system changed because of civil society movement. The education system changed because of civil society movement. The access to healthcare services changed because of this pressure. So there is a huge expectation that we should lead this change, which can be a challenge, but if we use it in the right way, it can become our power. And because of the fact that the organization started to be more vocal, more impactful, and bring changing of the table, this is why we observed in the last 10 years more structure erosive tactics against the civil society organization, trying to make their life more difficult, restrict their performance, and even some of the organization to be try to be shut down. Example of such kind of piece of legislation or tactics, the FARA legislation, the Foreign Agent Act. It is introduced in the last 6 years in Bulgaria, almost every year by different political organizations, but it's not the American FARA legislation, the pro-Russian style legislation that is forbidding any kind, not just restrict your international funding, but every kind of your international relationship and exchange of ideas. Another good example from the last, it's not a good, opposite to the good, example from the last 2 years, the lobbying legislation. Bulgaria wants to be part of the OECD network. The European Commission also insists on more transparency. So they brought to the table the idea about have more regulation on the lobbying activities, which is good, legitimate. Transparency, more transparency, better for the society. But in fact, the way that was introduced will restrict, in fact, the advocacy, because according to all services in Bulgaria, for example, the word lobbying is a foreign word, and it's labeling like that you are doing something that is serving foreign interests, private interests, something even conspiratorial. So if we have such kind of law with the name Lobbying Act and the NGOs are lobbyists, this will give a very bad reputation labeling to the civil society organization. Also, one of the draft that was introduced is pushing a lot of pressure on the organization, not on the administration, to be transparent. So as we, the lawyers, are saying, the devil is in the details. We are seeing in the last 10 years such kind of tactics that are trying, nevertheless, that they have legitimate aim, they are trying at the end of the day to restrict the performance of the organizations. And the third challenging opportunity that I want to mention is the trust. As Louisa mentions, if you check the trust to institution in Bulgaria is not very high. Even the trust is not very high to people from the business sector. So we, the civil society organization, nevertheless that we are attacked a lot, we have the higher trust level of support comparing to all the others, which again is creating expectation that we should move beyond our small niche topics to more broader societal topics. And here some problems can start, because I see that some of my colleagues, because of this expectation and pressure, they started to be more involved in different political relationships, and this will lead to some political involvement of the organization. And since the landscape is not very safe and very fragile, can bring more problems to the civil society. So what we do, trying to use these challenging opportunities, we think, or at least a group of the organization, we think that we should do and use the momentum in the right. And I will share with you 3 things that we are doing now, and we see that they are very successful. The first one is building cross-sectoral relationship. Working with the business, so far, this is my opinion, was more related to support their charity activities. But now we think that we have a new perspective, bringing the bigger and more powerful actor in this private sector, the business, to work with us together, raise and scale up our voice about the different big changes that we want to see in the environment. So this is a key strategy for us, bring them to work together on the volunteering end, bring more support for philanthropy, better education, all these advocacy topics, using their more powerful voice. The second strategy that we have is building cross-thematic coalition and relationship, having in mind the number of the civil society sector, which is a small community. We think that it's a good strategy really to have a bigger waves that are showing the people commitment, and also to give the picture that you cannot be good in the educational reform if the freedom of speech is restricted, for example. If you cannot be successful in anti-corruption policies, if environmental organizations are restricted or shut down because each gap in the landscape of the civil society activism means that it will affect all the others. And the third thing that it's really crucial, the last but not the least, is engaging more and more people in what we do by direct action. Volunteering, donating, we really believe that people that are donating, being part of your mission, this is the real shield in front of us that will protect us in the best way. So those are our current strategies. I will finish with something that Louisa shared, that being together, united in our country is a complicated topic. But I think as civil society organization, our task is exactly to bring people together for the big important societal things, in contradiction to the political will for separation and segregation of different ideas, communities, and movements. So I'll sit down back. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.
So we'll open the floor to questions. Hands up. Okay, gentleman in the back, go right ahead.
As both of you probably know, a very large part of Bulgarians in the world since 1990 left Bulgaria. Maybe about a third of all Bulgarians live outside of Bulgaria. What role do you view in terms of sort of building civic society involving Bulgarians outside of the country, like for example America or Turkey, Canada?
Yes, go right ahead.
Do you wanna? I think there is a greatly unexplored potential there. We have good examples of colleagues from civil society who are already trying to engage the Bulgarian diaspora that is living abroad, and they're doing this pretty successfully. For example, colleagues from Teach for Bulgaria, Zadnuk Chas. And this is by far something that we haven't explored properly. I think there is an unspoken, I mean, I myself was an immigrant for 10 years. So I think there is an unspoken tension between Bulgarians who left and Bulgarians who stayed. You have very often those conversations where I know these from people who've actually left the country and come back and say, I never know whether whatever I say is going to be perceived as if I'm preaching. Or I also sometimes get the reaction of people saying, oh, you left the country, you don't have the right to actually vote because you don't know anything about politics, you don't follow good enough. Or they say, you know, you don't have any stake in this country anymore, so you don't have the right to do that. And I said, I think there is, I see some people nodding because I'm guessing this is exactly the reaction you're getting when you go back home. But I think to the contrary of that, there is absolutely a potential that we ought to explore, and we haven't done a good job yet.
Yeah, I want to give an example with our work. In the last 10 years, we are working a lot with the judge community in Bulgaria. Focus very often on disability rights issue and children rights issue. And in the beginning, we made a mistake thinking that it's better to work with the Supreme Court judges or the middle court judges because still in our heads we are very centralized, thinking that if we change the culture and the mindset over there, it will cover the whole system. But suddenly we understood that this is a wrong way to do it because the young judges that studied abroad, traveled a lot, they have already this cultural change. It was really easy with them directly to implement the thing that we want without having this long ideological conversation about the rights and the communities. So I think it's undiscovered and unused potential that we have. Even in my organization, we mentioned that we have in the last 6 years international student program internship. Mainly those are students, Bulgarian students that are studying abroad, they come to Bulgaria and they want to use the summer for internship or do something for the nonprofits. And they are especially interested about nonprofits and community work. So I think this is a huge potential. Slowly it's show up in Bulgaria and yeah, we have to use it.
Thank you. Next, yes.
So I'm wondering if you could give us examples of maybe collaborations already happening, cross-sectoral or also cross issue.
Yeah, okay. Very nice.
You know, can you just go back?
Yeah, I can speak about the volunteering act as a recent example, how we built a strong coalition with companies. This is an issue in Bulgaria, like for the 20 years, we tried to establish an act that is supporting and enhancing the volunteerism in our country. So in the last 2 or 3 years, we started to work with those companies that are already having some practices supporting volunteerism. The mobile operators, Accenture Bulgaria, some other companies. When we started the conversation with them in the beginning, they were like, we are not doing any advocacy work. So go guys and do your advocacy work. We are just supporting our company culture to enhance these values. But after, how to say, a process of really thinking how if we sit together, go together to the parliament and to the council of ministers to bring this change happen, this will affect not only their companies, but this will be the golden rule that will affect all the companies in Bulgaria. And this was the crucial point that they jump in the conversation and they join us in roundtables in the parliament, council of ministers. Another example is about the AI topic and what we do as society to be sure that there is an ethical compliance when we develop such kind of technologies. So another working cross-sectorally, it's about finding, we are speaking still different languages, the companies and the people from the nonprofit, but it's a process to find that we are sharing the same values, nevertheless we are seeing them from different perspectives. So this is a journey process, but at the end it's very satisfactory. About cross-thematic coalition, recently, I'm sorry, we did together 8 organizations that are working on different topics. I'm sorry. Sorry, yeah, because it's closed window thing, so there is no pressure, but I will have it. Maybe Louisa, you can say the story about Chudasata.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, when the I mean, Nadia mentioned that there have been various attempts to pass this Foreign Extradition Act over the years, but there was a great concentration of those attempts in the last 1.5 years. And so when that happened, a number of us came together, even though probably the only organization with the focus on the environment of civil society is theirs organization. We managed to have a moment of rally around the flag effect, where organizations focusing on volunteering, like us on communist history and civic education and others, got together in the understanding that if the environment is hostile, there's going to be no space for any of our work, regardless of how of how big our teams are, or how stable our funding is, or how many friends we have in the media and can get a interview scheduled. And so we wanted to do to start a communications campaign, but not do a one-off campaign, but see this as a try and error and then continue on the way. Because the understanding is that if 50% of Bulgarians say that they have never met a civil society organization, this means that politicians can very quickly put a cross on us and no one's gonna cry after that. And so the 8 of us, 8 organizations came together. We allocated parts of our budgets to a communication work. And we first, put efforts into understanding who our target group is, just like political parties do segmentation. That's exactly what we did to define the so-called movable middle and to figure out what are actually the messages that people care about. And then we built a campaign that was all about, human language. So nothing of the civil society speak that we're so much used to. And it had great results. And now this is basically sowing the ground, and more work has to continue being doing, so they will become more and more popular. But we got to learn a lot on the way there, because each of us had to put a team member on the joint team. So that's, for the first time, really working in such a large consortium within the country. We're used to be doing that with partners in, across Europe, but we had actually never done this issue-based in the country.
Yeah, and we were the organizers, 8 organizations, but in fact, more than 100 organizations jumping in the campaign. So we managed to create this big communication way. And at the end, we managed to reach, according to the data that we checked, almost 2 million people. So 1/3 of the Bulgaria heard about this campaign. In this way, we scale up the the visibility of the organizations. Yeah.
Do you have a way to measure engagement with your work from people rather than organizations? So I understand that a lot of the work is organizational, right? You reach to businesses, you reach to other nonprofits, and you have the numbers for organizations, 30,000 and 1 million. But do we have a sense of whether people engage with your work, how they engage? And I don't know, that's not asking too much, but where are those people? Like any sort of demographics?
Yeah, we are doing such kind. We started to do such kind of real research about the society and its behavior. According to the last data, 32% of the Bulgarians are volunteering annually. And this number, if you see the data in the last 20 years, slowly increased, which is a very good trend. Louisa mentioned that 50% still of the Bulgarians consider that they never met an NGO, but I doubt, because they met a sport club and communities perished. But still, from the other 50 that met, almost 90% of them are very satisfied of the relationship. So here it's about increasing the way how we reach these already NGOs. About giving and individual donations, the last report of the Donors Forum is showing that I think every 4th Bulgarian is already donating. We have to check the last data, but it's also increasing as number of people that are giving to particular organization, or even the last report was showing that those who are donating started to include their different kinds. They started to donate to different causes in Paradigm, which is great, because means that they are more involved in other topics. And we try very carefully to follow exactly who are the main line of our persona that we can engage. Normally, mainly, they are people that are educated in the big cities. So this is why we are trying to figure out new strategy, how to get in these grassroots regions, which are more hardly accessible, and start to make a relationship and connection with these people. Which means that a lot of the civil society are doing a lot of job outside of Sofia, nevertheless they are registered. A great example is also Sofia platform. You should change your name, maybe. Sofia platform, but in fact they are doing a lot of job outside Sofia.
You had a question right here in the front? No,
Oh,
don't turn around, you.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead.
Yeah, I was nicely surprised when you mentioned that the nonprofit sector holds like higher trust. And traditionally, I know from experience that Bulgarians distrust all institutions kind of equally. So what do you think is the reason for this good development?
For the NGOs,
Yes, specifically for the NGO.
unfortunately, part of it is because people do not believe to the institutions. And this is why sometimes we are the last resource for solving some of the problems. Recently, we had a training with some grassroots organization, and I remember the lady from one very, very small city, she was saying, we are like the alternative municipality. People are coming to them for solving all the problems that they have, unfortunately, because the municipality should do their job. And I think that those who already received, this is why they are happy with the support, they are satisfied. They need something, and the organization are the ones that are bringing this. This is why we have more trust. Very often when we have even a crisis, or some, fires or floods or such kind of things, the volunteers of the organization are on the front line, including in COVID times. After the COVID, we measure the public attitude, and we show a big increase of the trust because the angels were on the first line of the problem solving part. So this is why. To the business, it's interesting why we are more trusted. Comparing to the business, it's a long conversation. I think in Bulgaria, there is some stigma related to those businesses who are rich and welfare because maybe they are having their money not in a trustworthy way, and the issue with the corruption is also affecting the business level of trust, let's say.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about civic education. So for Louisa primarily, but it intersects also maybe on the others. Thank you so much for this, by the way, this presentation is fantastic to get a chance to dig in to what has been happening in Bulgaria. You mentioned that there has been that the youth, the millennials have are more active, and I'd love to follow that thread a bit for your own work. Are you making special efforts in the civil society sector, for example, with these groups? Obvious question, but also in terms of civic education, even though it's highly centralized, and there have been these, these wafts and wanes with the political regimes, I guess, that must affect civic education and what is required. So I'd love also a comment on the one hand for an overview. I know that's not so easy because you've been so involved and there's a lot of nuance, but how have these changes in politics also affected civic education in terms of what's in it? And secondly, wondering also if in the light of the increased interest in youth, perhaps and higher trust in civil society organizations, if you're seeing a move more towards the non-formal education sector in terms of citizenship education. Sorry, that's a lot there. You take on whatever you're interested in.
Louisa, these are great questions and thanks for coming today. So as you know, we introduced civic education as a formal subject in schools in 2019. We did not have such a subject before, but it comes only in the 11th and the 12th grade. And education in Bulgaria is compulsory till your 16th year of age. So those who do not continue studying after the 10th grade basically do not have that. Honestly, when we call them Gen Z protests erupted end of last year, I got a really nice message from a friend who said, all the civic education work you've done is paying back. And I was like, oh, this is melting like butter. So, but I know that this is not true, because if there is one subject, young people find totally useless, this is civic education. It is, I'm grateful that we carved out the space for that, and that we created awareness about something called civic education in the first place. Because I know from the times when we were founded, which is 13 years ago, no one was talking about civic education. Now, so many organizations are talking about civic education, even companies are talking about civic education. So there is a conversation about it. Whether we mean the same things, whether the content is the same, I could not say. But there is already, that's out in the world. The way civic education in schools is taught is in a very traditional didactic way. So what kids cannot do is they cannot make a connection between the content and the real world. And so this is where organizations like ours are trying to step in by doing a couple of things. First is really provide truly high value experiential teacher training activities. And I know teacher training activities sounds very boring, but believe me, this is very important. The second thing is provide really good materials that help you have a very dynamic class afterwards. And the third thing is provide fact-checked information that gives them an opportunity to make that connection between the content and the real world event, which is very often not on their radar because they're not on TikTok, they're not on Instagram, they don't speak the Gen Z language, and now it's Gen Alpha, actually not anymore even Gen Z. So we try to fill that void, and as you were saying, the truly active teachers resort to non-formal civic education, and I think this is something people forget. But it's not only about Bulgaria. That's about at least I can speak of European Union countries. Good teacher trainings and innovation in civic education always come from civil society, because there is more capacity to, think outside of the framework of the school curricula. So in that sense, there are a number of really cool youth-led Instagram civic education projects, I would call them, or organizations. One of them is actually sitting with us in the room. That's the fourth person over there. He's running a really cool Instagram profile that is being very popular amongst young people and makes data and statistics accessible without giving any, values judgment on that. And then there are two more of those Instagram projects that have exploded during the protests, because this is where especially young people find information in their language that they can access and do something with. So yeah, absolutely. We have been, ever since we had that successful advocacy campaign to introduce the project, the subject in schools, we haven't had a political window of opportunity to change something about the subject. There are many things to be said about the content of the programs. There are many things to be said about introducing it earlier than the 11th and the 12th grade. But the debate went in a totally different direction. There was an attempt to introduce religion in schools. And this is not to say that civil society is against teaching religion per se, but of course, in a country that is so, intertwined with Russia, our worry has been that this is going to become a propaganda subject more than anything else. So there is an interim government now, but there is no window to work with the parliament. And so we will have to wait and see what happens after the elections. And the hopes are not very high, knowing that probably the former president, who is now going to run for parliament, is going to win the majority of those next elections. We're most probably going to see one form of that religion subject being introduced. Our fight now is to have kids have the choice of a non-religious pillar within that subject, something that teaches you history, but is not dogmatic, so you don't have to. And this opens a whole other set of problems, because Bulgaria, as you know, has a sizable Muslim minority. but it also has other minorities, and it also has part of the population that is not religious. And so this is not being taken into account.
I have a question for all three of you, including you, Gail.
Oh, good.
So,
And I have a question too, after you're done, the religion piece, I'm very interested in that.
I just wanted to say,
minorities.
I'm not sure if we're running out of time, so just to make sure that if we're going beyond one, we ask everyone if they
Can
have
we
the
do that?
time.
oh, sure.
Yeah, that's what I thought. We could go to 1:30. I thought it was from
Yeah.
12 to 1:30.
Oh, sorry.
I think we have lots of time.
Oh, sorry for that.
No, we're all happy. Go ahead, go Jeff.
So, to this day, the foundational text on civil society, social capital, including social trust, is Bob Putnam's work from the early 90s. And he was studying Italy, and he wanted a way to measure social capital and social connectivity in society that was separate from anything having to do with politics as his kind of baseline for the is this a society that has a lot or a little social capital? And his baseline measurement was choral societies, and his research finding was that like every indicator of successful democracy, civic cooperation, you know, the political aspect of that correlated very highly with the extent of choral societies in the different regions of Italy. And so I was wondering if we could do on the back of an envelope that analysis of Bulgaria. What are the, so we know they have the choral
No,
societies.
that's the
Are people
strong
like
thing.
stealing the money from the treasury of the choral society, or do they trust each other? Do they have
No,
connections
no,
beyond
the-
their
the-
cousins?
The dancing and the small groups of singers, the singing tradition goes back centuries in Bulgaria. The folk singing is so powerful. You know, Yasna Voices here in New York sings Bulgarian folk music, but that goes back into the society for centuries and centuries. And that has to be bringing people together, not just in Sofia, but in the tiny villages, because that's where I know the New Yorkers go out to the villages to sing with the older ladies so that they learn all the techniques for the singing. So that's got to be influential in the society overall. I don't know if politically they're active at all, but I know the singing is powerful out there. That's for sure. That's maybe someplace you need to look. Look among all the singings and the dancing, the Bulgarian dancing societies.
Yeah, but are there the dancing societies like hyper local?
I should think, I should think they're really local.
Operate in Bulgarian,
I don't know.
choral societies at a national level.
That would be great to know. I don't know. I think it's mostly local. They're a little local.
I think it's completely national.
Do you? Oh,
Because,
speak.
but not in an or, I mean, the problem is, I've been spending a lot of time revisiting Csikszentmihalyi's work on creativity because I know just enough, I've spent just enough time in Bulgaria to be completely confused. Incredibly hopeful and also constantly disillusioned. But for me, the two most creative groups I've seen in the last 15 years are Ukrainians since 2014. And that creativity reveals itself in a way that if we pay attention, we can all learn from. For one reason, it's creativity in a crucible moment. And the other is Bulgarians, which is this like sleepy, quiet creativity that you don't recognize until you wonder, based on most basic analyses of why cities work. Sofia should be a broken city, and it is one of the most livable, most functional cities I've ever spent time in. And it makes sense because in daily life, and you two should just totally shoot me down on this, especially Louisa. My outsider experience, and let's be clear, Bulgarians are the best at code switching. If there's an American in the room, and there's money on the table. There's money on the table when I'm in the room, but if there's an American in the room and there's money on the table, you're gonna hear a very different conversation than you hear at the coffee shop. But what happens in that city is people do when it comes to daily life. But it's I don't know, I'm gonna age myself. It's a whole country of MacGyvers. Something is broken. People don't want to pay more for anything, so they fix it themselves. Like and especially social platform, like the things you've done, like people figure out how to do it. It's also, I think, a nation of coders. Like all the people who are younger than me, when I talk to them about the video games they played 20 years ago, they hacked the games. They figured out how to hack the games. So there is due in daily life. It's unclear how to take this moment, because last time I was there in September, the people I spoke to who were under 30, it was the normal conversation of the disease that I think you're mad at me for naming this, but the disease of what's the pointism, which is heavy in this country in one form and heavy in Bulgaria. But then my Signal channel was full of photos from people in their 20s saying, Gigi, look at what's happening. It's just, these were people who, when I talked to them about things, were like, there was no reason to engage in their minds. So this is my hope comes from the idea that Bulgaria is the front door of Europe. It teaches us all sorts of things. And it's a mindset issue. It's a collective mindset issue. So the reason I say about the reason this is connected to choral groups, that like the horror just breaks out and all of a sudden everybody around you is doing the dance. Like there's not a core sense of, even though they're organized communities, there's not a core sense of in order to do this, I need to join this group. People just do it. And when your experience, like going to the symphony in Bulgaria, everybody is clapping.
They all knew
in rhythm.
They all knew Polonelli and Tudora. Everybody in that auditorium knew the song.
So
And
the attitude
I was
like they
playing
would-
an organ version of it, and they'll say, "Oh, we know that one."
Yeah, who do you think you are? You need training or need to do a group. We all just do it anyway, and so it sort of disrupts the narratives and the studies from the 90s because it just doesn't fit.
Gail, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want-
excuse me, just 1 minute.
Like the break in
Yeah.
the jazz, which we don't have.
But I have a question, which is that in Bulgaria, is the choral society the measure, or is there some other measure that like the next PhD student should be looking at in Bulgaria?
Yeah, so to the point of bowling alone, the reason why I started looking at the phenomena of the civic deserts is exactly that. That we identify that there are parts of the country where nothing's happening. And Bulgaria is the fastest shrinking nation in the world, which means that there is grave depopulation. And if we follow the projections of the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, it says that by 2050, 2/3 of the country are going to be population deserts. So you're going to have Sofia and another 5 cities, and basically this is going to be it. And so in a country like that, it's just very difficult. And it's also a question of whether it makes sense to make that investment in civil society outside of, the capital in those six cities. I mean, there are people like us who will always tell you, of course, if there's one person, it matters. That the question is it enough? So to your question, Gail, one of the most stable networks in the country is the network of community centers. They were established already more than 100 years ago, and they have been the traditional network of community centers where people used to come together and do whatever they're interested in, whether it's a choir or it's dancing. I think what we try to we would love to see is that these places become welcoming for younger people as well. Because there is a sense of this all belongs to the past, and this is all, we don't know whether that's a true tradition or not, whether this is being layered over during communism or reinvented. And so now young people are just extremely globalized and they're interested in other things. So the question for people like us is, how can you go to that community center where, retired citizens usually would go to today and have I don't know, a debate about the Iran war to which young people would like to go. And so the question is really, how do we bring these two worlds together? Because I think the phenomena of having the generations not speaking the same language is the same everywhere. And this doesn't leave Bulgaria, as it's not a case of difference. So that generational, intergenerational tie, I'm not sure how we're gonna restore it, because back in the days, you would come back from school and you were forced to spend time with your grandmother and grandfather, and now what you do is when you go visiting them, you just look at your phone because it's more exciting.
Yes, sir.
A set of puzzles based on deep knowledge of Bulgaria. I've been there for 3 days of my life.
But you're avid reader of Georgi Gospodinov.
But the question, one is one about polarization. When I think about Bulgarian polarization, my mind goes to France in the 1880s and 1890s, where there's a new Third Republic, but its degree of legitimacy is deeply questioned by the Catholic Church, by the remnants of an ancien regime, by external as well as internal actors, and you get a fiercely divided society, as in the Dreyfus moment, for example. Is that a reasonable analogy to where Bulgaria is, as distinct, say, from polarization in Canada or the United States, which may have very different kinds of dynamics? We tend to use the word as if it has one meaning, but it may, located in historical time, have different meanings. The second question, not entirely unrelated, has to do with cross-border relationships, both of the political parties and civil society organizations. Unless my mental map is wrong, adjacent to Romania, to Serbia, to Turkey, not very far from Ukraine, and certainly, although geographically slightly further from Russia, historical influence and so on and so forth. So where in this mix of civil society and political realities, how should you want us to think about the degree of porousness of exchanges across these borders, or the degree to which there are real barriers so that the Bulgarian dynamic turns inward as opposed to out?
Yeah, I love the questions. Nadia, do you want to go first?
For the second question, maybe.
Yeah, go ahead.
I will say that the exchange that I will speak here about the non-profit organization, it's very much influenced by the European Union policy. So you will find out that the Bulgarian civil society organization are working a lot with the Romanian, the Greek organization, and all the other Central and Eastern European organization, not so much with the other Balkan organization that are the organization. Nevertheless, that we have a common history in a way, common problems, but all these political alignments in a way influenced, have say, non-profit work as well. And also because of the funding system, there is a huge resources that is coming from the European Union, support civil society interaction and exchange, but between the European countries. So we are in the championship league in a way. So this is why, unfortunately, we had good connection with some organization in North Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia. But when we want to scale up our work, we need resources. So the level is very small and it's influenced by the international political things.
Yeah, so just to add to that, unfortunately, civil society cooperation follows the funding. And in the lack of states funding and in the lack of let's say, policies for good neighborly relationships, this is the result. We get to partner with organizations in Norway, but not partnering with organizations in North Macedonia. I am always thinking of the great policies for exchange between Germany and France following the Second World War and the amazing results and the amazing number of bilingual couples and children. But I am thinking also of a generation in Europe that is called Generation EasyJet, following the name of the low-cost company airplane. But that excludes the Western Balkans, for example. And so we oftentimes know better what is going on in Germany than in Romania. Then to your first question, it absolutely feels like, and you know, Ivan Krastev has written about this. It feels like half of the country is the somewheres and half of the countries is everywheres. So people who belong to a certain place and people who could be at home anywhere in the world. And this has a lot to do with the modernization that Nadia talked about. There's a part of society that is focused and interested on that. And there is a part of society that says, you don't have legitimacy for that because you don't have the support for that. So we stick to the status quo, whichever way you want to define it in that case. I am quite happy about the fact that we're not there yet to have what you would call effective polarization, where people would start becoming even violent. And sometimes I'm thinking, thank God, there is how did you call this?
Be quiet.
Gigi, I don't care about.
What's the pointism?
The what's the pointism, yeah. Sometimes I'm happy that there is a lot of Bulgarians are what's the pointism group. Because had we been excessively active, we would have probably gotten to a point of political violence. But because we're not so active and engaged, this engagement has also, I think, their upsides, and that's the fact that we're not killing each other on the streets.
Good, good.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
if I can add a comment to your question about polarization. From my experience as a Bulgarian, I think you might be right in terms of questioning the legitimacy of power. So I think there are, based in my view, 3 levels of questions. So a part of the people just stick to the old socialist regime and think that everything that came afterwards is just completely illegitimate, a failure, and shouldn't be trusted, shouldn't be obeyed, so on. So there is definitely that, and like honestly, in the lower right part of that chart with the political parties, I think a lot of people think like that. They think whatever came next is just illegit. And I guess there is also a part of the people that do not necessarily associate this with the socialist heritage, but somehow believe Bulgaria happens to be like an American or a German puppet or something like that. So they see Bulgaria as a ruled colony by someone else, which of course isn't true, but still I say there is a sizable minority, of course, that thinks so. And this definitely fuels the polarization. So if you don't believe in the legitimacy of your country as such, as this power structure, it will definitely be one of the poles of this debate.
The vulnerability to dis and misinformation effects in Bulgaria is, top of the charts, right? And
You can see this about many countries nowadays.
no, but in the data, right? It is, it is good or bad, that's at an exceptional level, and it makes me wonder, right? Even this idea, like there must be a better word, Bulgarian or even Slavic word than polarization. Because polarization presents this staticness of, both sidism, binary things, and it's just never feels that way. So it always feels like we're taking a very structured English word and applying it to something that is so much more nuanced. I don't know.
I was gonna say, excuse me, just for a minute. Yes, I think she had a comment. Go right
I
ahead.
just want to back on this a little bit.
Yeah.
I think the reasons for polarization in Bulgaria and Eastern Europe, I speak as a Bulgarian and I speak as a sociologist. Well, But I think, you know, a lot of the polarization that you see is very similar to what's happening here. High urbanization, I think Louisa mentioned, in a lot of Eastern Europeans, you see that economic activity, social activity, cultural activity is really focused in the main city and then the rest of the country. Even the just population movement, you can track over time and you see this concentration. And that creates two different worlds in which these people live, right? You have the stagnation of small cities that are literally captured by somebody, which is, you know, controlling the economic life there. People are literally afraid to speak up because they're paid for their jobs and so on. They're you know, compared to themselves to being like a feudal situation. And then you have people in the city and they're dynamic and they travel and they work in companies, and those companies, yeah, those are the companies that are interested in curbing corruption, because those tend to be the technical new companies that sprung up. Companies in the small towns, they thrive on corruption. So this kind of polarization is really driven by structural factors, which are very similar to the ones here, to the ones all over the world. Like some people might call this neoliberalism. You know, I don't, you know, use big words like this, but it's, you know, this is what it is. It's this kind, and that's what Orban used. And you know, this was highlighted here. The civic deserts are very, you know, important spaces where these kinds of narratives take hold. And that's why, you know, yeah, there's very local, I think you were talking about this, it's very interesting. There was a scholar 20 years ago, which wrote a lot about corruption in Eastern Europe. And she was very careful in distinguishing two kinds of corruption. So when she talked about, for example, the corruption in Eastern European countries, it was this kind of idea that because you don't trust institutions, you cannot rely on them, you have to figure out ways, right? The thing that you were talking, everybody's on the fabric. You have to figure out a way through your network, right? So this idea of social capital doesn't work very well in Europe because you do have a network and you can get things done. And yes, it seems incredible that nothing's working or should be working, but somehow it is. It's because of people mobilizing, but it's local action. And it doesn't result in big change because it doesn't go through organizations. It doesn't go into the institutions. That's the issue. And I think the idea that was mentioned with the community organization in small towns, it's fantastic idea because this is already there. It's so-called third space. It's not your home, it's not your work. It's the third space you can go. You don't have to necessarily pay a membership, right? You don't have to belong in any sort of way, but it's a place where lots of things can happen. And so I think that will be the first step towards kind of making this movement from an informal network to a more organized network without seeming that it's highly political. Because my take on the NGO in Bulgaria is that yes, it's very connected to political issues, rightly so. Healthcare, education, corruption, right? And sometimes people in those small areas don't really feel connected to those issues the way you would think they should be, right? So you have to give them a chance somewhere to start doing that work, especially when you know that in those small towns, there really is the big guy or firm that like controls, right?
So then, excuse me, just one minute. So maybe Louisa and Nadia can sort of wrap things up because we really are getting down to the time.
Sorry.
Thank you for those wonderful comments. We really appreciate it. Take it away.
The last comment was really deep, very deep for us because this is the real picture. I mean, the tension between the big cities and the small cities is very complex. And it's not one-way decision. But as I said, if we are a civil society organization, we should use this momentum and try new strategies. Find the places that people are interested in. A small Italian, the basic network, and try to bring their attention not to the big political things, but the things that are important for them, just to be safe, be society and be connected. So it's also about our power, our potential, how we are going to use it.
Yeah,
Well, honestly, I would like to use then my minute just to say how grateful I am to see so many fellow Bulgarians and adopted Bulgarians like Gigi in the room. To have see that interest in you and to have you, spend this hour and a half talking about Bulgaria. So thank you for caring. Thank you for the really good questions. Nadia and I promise that we will bring you a little present. For those who don't know, Baba Marta, so March is the month where we have this pagan tradition and we wear a matnica as a bracelet or something else. And when you see a stork, I know there are no storks in New York, but when you see a blossoming tree, you put it on the tree. That's not very environmentally friendly. So you might want to just keep it home and reuse it next year on March 1st. We put there our website and our contacts. So if you'd like to stay in touch with us, we would like that very.
In fact, all the Martinica was produced by social enterprises, organizations that are supporting different causes. So if you take one of them, the good message will be with you. So, yeah.
There are some on the table, one bracelet, so whoever wants a bracelet, please.
Just let me find what I said.
I think we all should give a round of applause. Thank you all for being with us.
So. Of course.
What's that?
Oh, you're right, probably not, you're right, yeah. Thank you.
Bulgarian
Glad you
version.
come with, but didn't get your marketing.